All right. Well, we're in John 10, but we're going to do a bunch of reading today. We're looking at the parable of the shepherd and his flock in John 10. And I think we'll just read the first 6 verses, the parable itself today. And we're going to look back at some other scriptures. We started talking about how crucial the first verse is. If you don't understand that, then it's really hard to get the picture of what Jesus is saying. And it's something that it is speaking about the sheepfold. We talked about that a little bit last week. And it is something that the people Jesus was speaking to, it was part of their life every day. They understood it perfectly. But it was just for a quick review on that. It was a sheepfold was a place of safety for sheep at night. Shepherds would take their sheep to the sheepfold, usually just outside of the towns. They were all over the country. And it was a high fence that would keep predators out and thieves. And it was, a lot of times they were palisaded. I had to look that up, and that's with points on the top of the fence, to make it harder to climb over, a place of protection. The shepherds would take their sheep into the sheepfold, and there would be a gatekeeper, and they would leave their sheep in the pen. So like many shepherds would come, the flocks would all be together. In the morning, when they came out, they would go out. The shepherd would the gatekeeper would let the shepherds in, and they would call out their sheep. They would call for their sheep, and just their sheep would follow them out. And this is something that happened all the time. If you don't understand and know that picture, it's really hard to understand the first verse here of the sheepfold and the picture that Jesus is trying to get across, the spiritual picture of this natural thing that they did. So let's read the first. I'm going to just have some people do reading today. Karen, would you read John 10, verses 1 to 6? This is the parable itself. Last week we read verse 8 to 21, and that was more of Jesus explaining the parable. Because in verse 6 it says they didn't understand what he was saying. But we're going to come back to that next week and look at that verse by verse. But I want to show you the picture that Jesus is painting. It seems like he's so harsh with the Pharisees. And here, as we discovered last week, he's calling them thieves and robbers. And these were the church leaders. The people that were in charge. Karen, go ahead and read that.
I tell you the truth, anyone who sneaks over the wall of a sheepfold rather than going through the gate must surely be a thief and a robber. But the one who enters through the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep recognize his voice and come to him. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. After he has gathered his own flock, he walks ahead of them, and they follow him because they know his voice. They won't follow a stranger. They will run from him because they don't know his voice. Those who heard Jesus use this illustration didn't understand what he meant.
Okay, so he did not understand, they did not understand what he meant by this parable. And we're going to look today and read back into chapter 9. And we probably have to read a lot of it, because there probably shouldn't be a chapter 10. It probably should just be still chapter 9, because the story never stops. It's an answer to exactly what just took place in chapter 9. And we've seen that with many, many parables. That something happened, and Jesus told a parable about that thing that just happened. And this is a picture of the sheep in a safe place, but thieves and robbers are talked about. In what we read last week, I guess I don't have it with me, but there's three places in this parable and then what Jesus speaks about. Three places where it talks about the thieves and robbers. And that was right at the end of our class last week. And I said, well, let me just give you one verse. And does anybody remember the verse I gave you?
Yeah, 10:1.
Uh,
Gave us something else because I didn't write it.
Yeah, it was, I probably didn't give you the reference,
Okay.
but we were,
In the temple, in the morning chambers.
yeah.
Yeah.
At that time, Jesus said, what did he say they did to his house? I think that was the question I asked you.
Made it a den of thieves.
He said, you've turned it into a den of thieves. And in this passage, and when we hear it quoted, usually it's in reference to the devil. They come to kill and rob and destroy, and that's very true of. Well, let's just go to verse 7. We'll read that too. Therefore, they didn't understand. Therefore, Jesus again said, and he started teaching about what it meant. I tell you the truth, I am the gate for the sheep. All who ever come before me were thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. And it goes on into 9, I am the gate, whoever enters through me will be saved. He will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. He's talking about all that came before him were thieves and robbers. And he was not talking about the devil there. He's talking about these church leaders who in chapter 9 just abused a new convert. And we're going to look at that today when we get to that. But it seems so harsh what he's doing with the Pharisees. But who was the ministry in the temple given to? It was a tribe, right?
Levi.
The Levites. Were Pharisees Levites?
Some were.
Some were.
Yeah.
Not all Levites were priests.
Right.
The priests came from the Levites, but the Levites had other duties too concerning the temple, but they weren't priests. So Jesus is calling, saying to these people that they were thieves and robbers. And there's a picture of that in verse 9. But I just want to read the verses, some of the verses that actually show, get my right notes in front of me. The verse that I gave you last week was Matthew 21:13. And that was just a quick example of Jesus referring to them directly as thieves. Matthew 21:13. This was right at the cleansing of the temple. Jesus said unto them, it is written, my house shall be called the house of prayer. But you have made it a den of thieves. Now, this wasn't new that Jesus was calling them thieves or robbers. They had just in chapter 9 tried to steal the opportunity of this new convert, this man born blind. They continually badgered him. Who did this? And he says, look, I don't know. All I know is I couldn't see, and now I can see. And there's a picture of conversion, and they were ready to steal that from him and to throw him out of the church. In Jeremiah 7:11. So if Jesus says in the temple that day, "My house shall be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves." Well, it means it's somewhere. This is prophecy fulfilled, isn't it? Let's go to Jeremiah 7. We're going to spend a little bit of time in Jeremiah 7. Okay, these prophets are the last prophets that were sent to Israel before the New Testament. You know, it was right before the New Testament. Then there was 400 years of silence. God didn't speak. And then we have the New Testament when John came, John the Baptist and Jesus. Verse 1 and 2. This is the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord. I'm gonna read a lot today, so we're gonna have to skip through a little bit, but just make a note of it. Come back to some of these and read a little more. But verse 1. This is the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord. Stand at the gate of the Lord's house, and there proclaim the message. Hear the word of the Lord, all you people of Judah who come through these gates to worship the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Reform your ways and your actions, and I will live in this place, and I will let you live in this place. Do not trust in deceptive words and say, "This is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord." If you really change your ways and your actions and deal with each other justly, if you do not oppress the alien, the fatherless, or the widow — we've heard a lot about that in the parables — and do not shed innocent blood in this place, and if you do not follow other gods to your own harm, then I will let you live in this place, in the land I gave your forefathers, and forever and ever. But look, you are trusting in deceptive words that are worthless. And verse 9. You will steal and murder and commit adultery and perjury, burn incense to Baal and follow other gods, but you have not known that other gods that you have not known, and then come and stand before me in this house, which bears my name, and say, "We are safe to do all these detestable things." Has this house, which bears my name, become a den of robbers to you? But I have been watching, declares the Lord. And there's a lot of places in the Old Testament under these prophets where they came to the people and spoke that their shepherds weren't taking care of them. And we're going to look at another one in just a minute. But the people were under kings and priests. Let's put it that way. And what were the kings and priests called? They were often, the title is often given to them as shepherds. You know, kings were often referred to as shepherds, and the priests were often referred to as shepherds. Jeremiah 10, just turn a couple pages. Go to chapter 10, verse 21. The shepherds are senseless and do not inquire of the Lord, and so they do not prosper, and all their flock is scattered. We just read in chapter 7 about scattered people that they weren't being tended. The sheep were scattered and doing their own thing. And the picture of the Old Testament, and Jesus is using it in the New Testament right here, as portraying himself as that good shepherd. But there was so much prophecy to the shepherds of Israel. Bad kings. There were good kings, but there were bad kings. And under bad kings, what happened to the nation?
Sin, idolatry,
Yeah, they were.
mess.
Yeah, it was a time of living in sin and reaping the reward of sin. You know, the
And-
consequences of sin for the
And
nation.
a lot of times the other nations and enemies came in and beat them up. They were at war
Yeah, yeah,
and not winning. but they-
yeah. God used other nations. You know, you look at our nation, and we were just, right before we came to church, we were listening to a guy on the TV where he was saying that about America. You read some of these prophets, and he was talking about Ezekiel 38 today, but it's like, he says, it sounds like this could have been written from a decision from the UN, the United Nations, yesterday, you know? Just the time that we're living in is a time like that where sin abounds. And the shepherds, the kings, the presidents, the leaders of the country, and much of the church is lacking. So in this verse, in verse 21, it speaks of the condition of the shepherds. The shepherds are senseless. In the NIV,
In the King James, it's a little different.
yeah, say it.
You know, that the pastors have become brutish and have
Brutish.
sought the Lord, and have not sought the Lord. Therefore they shall not prosper, and all their flocks shall be scattered.
Yeah,
They're brutish. I've seen farmers who drive everything, and they don't
Yeah.
prosper as well.
some of the, I would say most of the versions, when you look at, I use the Bible Gateway site, and you can just bring up a verse and look at it in every version. And I'd say half of them use stupid. The the shepherds were stupid. I looked at the Young's, literal translation, and it says that it calls the religious leaders of that time, those shepherds, basically bad shepherds. It says that it uses the translation basically that Jerry just read there. But it says this: for the shepherds have become brutish, and Jehovah they have not sought. Therefore they have not acted wisely, which is stupid, and all their flock is scattered. So there's a lot of different ways that it's translated, but you look at that, they have become brutish, and I mean, what's a brute? I mean, that's someone that is not good to the people, right? It's not good to those that they're around. They're bullies, yeah, bullies. In the commentary that we will look at, that we read in verse 7 to 21 of John 10, there's more about that. It's that you'll remember reading some of this from last week. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs because he is a hired hand, and he cares nothing for the sheep. In it for the money. It's a job to him. And I don't think I have this verse. Written down, but one of the things that is said about the Pharisees is that they love money. And it's after a parable we haven't done yet, so we'll look at that, but it was the parable of where the accountant that was losing his job, and what do they call that, Ellen? Do you have that on top of your head? It was the guy did something, he took all the debts. He says, you owe me $100, hey, $50. Because I'm losing my job, and I hope you remember me.
Yeah.
He just started cutting out,
Right.
I can't remember what they called that parable. I don't have it. But at the end of
Talking
that,
about.
at the end of that, he says that nobody can serve two masters, money and God, mammoth and God. And one of the things that is said about the Pharisees in that passage is that they love money. And they weren't really taking care of the sheep. They were using the sheep, stealing from the sheep. There's all kinds of abuses of the sheep. And we will see some of those here in just a second. One more I want to turn to is Zechariah 10, 2-3. And I will just read that. It says, the idols speak deceitfully. Diviners see visions that lie. They tell dreams that are false. They give comfort in vain. Therefore the people wander like sheep oppressed for the lack of a shepherd. All of these prophets spoke to conditions like these, where there was a lack of a shepherd. The nation was wandering. Verse 3 in Zechariah 10, my anger burns against the shepherds, and I will punish those leaders. For the Lord Almighty will care for his flock, the people of Judah, and make them like a proud horse in battle. Another picture of judgment against the shepherds that were prophesied. Now I want to turn to Ezekiel 34, and I want to read more of this.
Russ, was that the unjust steward?
Yes. Yes. And we haven't done that one yet, so we'll look at that. There's a lot of things that were said about Pharisees that was not too flattering. In fact, I'm going to turn quickly to I think I know where it is. I asked the question here a little while ago, were the Pharisees Levites? And Jerry answered, not all. And some of them were, a lot of them were, but not all. X3. No, I don't have that. I don't have that verse. But I'll just tell you what it is. I'll find that. I'll find that and have it next week. But Paul, the apostle, what does he say about himself concerning?
He was a Pharisee of the Pharisees.
Said he was a Pharisee. And in the very same verse it says, from the tribe of Benjamin. So these Pharisees that were in the church government, did they have a right to be there? Jesus was saying the ones that came before were thieves and robbers because they didn't come in through the gate.
So, okay, here's the question. Were the Pharisees, did they set themselves up? I mean, we know that God called the Levites to be the priests and the leaders in the temple and to do the temple duties, and they were from the tribe of Levi, they were the priests. So when the Pharisees came along, did they set up their own, like the Pharisees, the Sadducees, did they set up their own, is that something that man developed, was the Pharisees and those institutions?
Yeah,
So that's why they didn't have to be Levites to be a Pharisee, right? Because it wasn't something God had
Right.
called them to do.
that's
set it up.
true, that's
They
true.
did usually have some of the Levites leading a group.
Right,
That's
And they wouldn't
true.
necessarily be a Levite.
But if you look at the parable, what Jesus is saying is you didn't come in through the gate. You know, anyone who, you know, is in that position that don't have the right to be there, that's how he can call them thieves and robbers, is that they came in by a different way.
because God was
Not through the
very,
gate.
when you study and read through the Old Testament, how God set up the order of the priests and through the line of Aaron and the Levites,
Right.
and he was very specific, and even when people would try to, like even when some kings that weren't, like Saul, look at his life turned into a mess because he didn't follow what God had ordered. And then we come to the New Testament with these Pharisees and Sadducees, and it's like, who put them in there? God didn't. Back, you know, when he
Right.
first laid the plans for this, so no wonder
They-
there's problems.
And that's what Jesus is dealing with.
Right.
Is, you know, these ones that were not his true representatives. You know, there are many groups of, I think they say there's like 7 different kinds of Pharisees. There's a name for each sect. Sadducees is another group and all those. But over that time of, you know, God not speaking, they developed a lot of things on their own that was not good, and that's what Jesus is dealing with in the parable, and in so many of the parables. In Ezekiel 34, if you're there, what does the heading of your chapter say?
The shepherds of Israel.
Shepherds of Israel, okay.
Prophecy against the shepherds.
What was that?
Prophecy against the shepherds.
Prophecy against the shepherds.
Mine says Israel, lack of shepherds.
Lack of shepherds.
It says shepherds and sheep.
Shepherds and sheep, that's what mine says.
The good shepherd.
Irresponsible.
Irresponsible. Okay, so it's what it is a prophecy about the good shepherd, but it's a prophecy against the bad shepherds. And it's almost a picture of what Jesus is saying in this parable. These Pharisees knew the scriptures. So he's bringing this again back to their mind. And I just want to read through some of this, and I'm going to read it to emphasize several points. But focus on the title of shepherd in here. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Woe to the shepherds of Israel. And when he says woe to something, that's never, that's not what you want to hear. We can think back to when Jesus spoke directly to the Pharisees. Woe to you, you know, the Pharisees and scribes in Matthew. There's a lot of those. Here's the Old Testament version. Jesus is just fulfilling scripture in the New Testament. Woe to the shepherds of Israel who only take care of themselves. Should not shepherds take care of the flock? You eat the curds, clothe you clothe yourselves with the wool and slaughter the choice animals, but you do not take care of the flock. You have not strengthened the weak, or healed the sick, or bound up the injured. Well, we hear about that a lot from Jesus in the parables. You have not brought back the strays or searched for the lost. There's a whole parable about that. You have ruled them harshly and brutally. So they were scattered because there was no shepherd. And when they were scattered, they became food for all the wild animals. My sheep wandered over the mountains and on every hill. They were scattered over the whole earth. No one searched or looked for them. In this passage, is Jesus talking about natural shepherds and natural sheep? No. He's talking about the shepherds of Israel, the shepherds of the nation, the shepherds of his people. And that is the condition, all of those things that are said there. That is brutal. That is brutal. Verse 7 to 10, that first passage, it just summarizes all the abuses of the shepherds over the people. But all they cared about was themselves. They didn't care about the sheep. And here, I mean, you'll see a lot of times when the kings are referred to as shepherds. Here they're talking about the religious leaders. In verse 7 to 10, we have the judgment, prophecy concerning the judgment of God on these bad shepherds of Israel. Therefore, you shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. As surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, because my flock lacks a shepherd, and so has been plundered, and has become food for all the wild animals. And because my shepherds did not search for my flock, but cared for themselves rather than for my flock, therefore, O shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against the shepherds, and will hold them accountable for my flock. I will remove them from tending the flock. In verse 10 is where I end there. I will remove them from tending the flock, so that the shepherds can no longer feed themselves. I will rescue my flock from their mouths, and it will no longer be food for them. They will no longer take advantage. He's calling it food for them in that verse 10. And then it goes on in verse 11 to 16, and this is foreshadowing Christ. In 11 to 16, he called out the bad shepherds. He pronounced judgment on them, and then he speaks of the good shepherd. The parable that we're in is the good shepherd and his sheep. This is what, verse 11, for this is what the sovereign Lord says, I myself will search for my sheep and look after them. As a shepherd looks after his scattered flock when he is with them, so I will look after my sheep. I will rescue them from all the places where they were scattered on the days of clouds and darkness. I will bring them out from the nations and gather them from the countries. I will bring them into their own land. I will pasture them on the mountains of Israel, in the ravines and in the settlements and in the land. I will tend them in a good pasture, and the mountain heights of Israel will be their grazing land. There they will lie down in good grazing land, and they will feed in a rich pasture on the mountains of Israel. It sounds like Psalm 23, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. I myself will tend my sheep and have them lie down, declares the sovereign Lord. I will search for the lost and bring back the strays. I will bind up the injured and strengthen the weak. But the weak and the strong I will destroy. I will shepherd the flock with justice. again, binding up the weak and healing, the people. And that's what Jesus was doing in John chapter 9. That the response to the Pharisees' treatment of that guy brought about the teaching of the parable of the Good Shepherd and the sheep. And it's right from the Old Testament, where it's right here. So I asked you, I think a little bit ago, is this talking about natural shepherds and natural sheep? No, it's talking about the people of Israel. And this next section, you really see that. From verse 17 down to the end of the chapter, it's a teaching. Well, verse 17, as for you, my flock, this is what the sovereign Lord says. So it's a prophecy in this section to the sheep, to those that are the citizens of Israel, basically. He speaks of judgment. I want to skip down to verse 20. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says to them. See, I myself will judge between the fat sheep and the lean sheep, because you shoved with flank and shoulder, butting all the weak sheep with your horns until you have driven them away. I will save my flock, and they will no longer be plundered. I will judge between one sheep and another. I will place over them one shepherd, my servant David. Of course, this is after David. So he's talking about the Messiah that would come through the line of David. He's talking about Jesus. He is that shepherd. And he will tend them. He will tend them and be their shepherd. I, the Lord, will be their God, and my servant David will be the prince among them. I, the Lord, have spoken. And that Messiah, this part of that passage has not been fulfilled yet. That is, Jesus came into the earth, and we're looking at that in John 10. This will be at the end, I think, basically. But going down through, just to read a couple more points. Verse 27. The trees of the field will yield their fruit, and the ground will yield its crops. The people will be secure in their land. They will know that I am the Lord when I break the bars of their yoke and rescue them from the hands of those who enslave them. They will no longer be plundered by the nations, nor will wild animals devour them. They will live in safety, and no one will make them afraid. I will provide for them. Then it talks about how good the land will be. But in verse 31, is he talking about natural sheep? No. It says, you, my sheep, the sheep of my pasture, are people. And I am your God, declares the sovereign Lord. I'm reading from the NIV, and it's interesting that in the new NIV, they dropped that where it says, you are people. Now, most versions, I think, says men. You are men.
Like the New Living says, you are my people.
You are my people. But it's all about the shepherding of the people. All these passages that we have read, and that's what this parable is about. Now, to get the full meaning of that parable that we read at the beginning of the class, you have to go back and look at the behavior of the Pharisees in chapter 9, in that miracle that happened there. So I was hoping we'd have time to read that today. Let's just turn to chapter 9 and see. see what we can, yeah, maybe we'll read it next week, but. But this is the picture that we sort of just read about. What was happening at the time of those Old Testament prophets. For all those years, I mean, they're still here, and Jesus is dealing with those leaders. It's the parable of Jesus healing that man that was born blind.
You want me to read it?
Yeah,
No? Start with it?
yeah, go ahead.
As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" "Neither this man nor his parents sinned," said Jesus, "but this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. As long as it is day, we must do the work of him who sent me. Night is coming, when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." Having said this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. "Go," he told them, "wash in the pool of Siloam." This word means sent. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, "Isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg?" Some claimed that he was. Others said, "No, he only looks like him." But he himself insisted, "I am the man." "How then were your eyes opened?" they demanded. He replied, "The man they call Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and then I could see." "Where is this man?" they asked him. "I don't know," he said.
Stop right there for just a minute. Now this next section is where the Pharisees become involved. This happened on the Sabbath. So that's number one problem.
So the first ones harassing him were the neighbors.
Yeah, people. The unshepherded people,
Right.
or the ones that were under the care of bad shepherds. Okay, go ahead.
It's okay. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had been blind. Now the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath. Therefore the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. "He put mud on my eyes," the man replied, "and I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. This man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath." But others asked, "How can a sinner do such miraculous signs?"
Okay, stop it there for a minute too. Okay, what they're saying right there is interesting. Some are saying one thing, some Pharisees are saying one thing, some Pharisees have taken a different opinion, like it's a little different. How can a sinner do such miraculous signs? So they were divided. That's sort of important, so I just want to make a note of that. Division amongst themselves. Go ahead.
So they were divided. Finally, they turned again to the blind man. "What have you to say about him?" "It was your eyes he opened." The man replied, "He is a prophet." The Jews still did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they sent for this man's parents. "Is this your son?" they asked. "Is this the one you say was born blind? How is it now he can see?" "We know he is our son," the parents answered, "and we know he was born blind. But how he can see now, or who opened his eyes, we do not know. Ask him. He is of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for already the Jews had decided that anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Christ would be put out of the synagogue.
Stop it there. Read that. Go ahead and read that again, 22.
His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for already the Jews had decided that anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Christ would be put out of the synagogue.
Okay, and that was under the care of these shepherds. That they would try to steal their opportunity, their salvation. And that is exactly what is happening to this guy here. Also, don't miss the subject of this miracle. blindness and seeing. All right, not just curing, healing, but the subject matter we'll see next week as we go back through the parable and take it verse by verse a little bit and look at the things. That subject is so important. Okay, go ahead.
That is why his parents said, "He is of age, ask him." The second time they summoned the man who had been blind. "Give glory to God," they said. "We know this man is a sinner." He replied, "Whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see." Then they asked him, What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered, "I have told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too?" Then they hurled insults at him and said, "You are his fellow disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from." The man answered, "Now that's remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly man who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." To this they replied, "You were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us?" And they threw him out.
Okay, let's stop right there again. Now, if you have a heading in your Bible, what's the heading of the next section?
Spiritual blindness.
Natural blindness, spiritual
True
blindness.
vision and true blindness.
So we'll look at that more next week. Go ahead, Joey.
Jesus heard that they had thrown him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" "Who is he, sir?" the man asked. "Tell me, so that I may believe in him." Jesus said, "You have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you." Then the man said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him.
That's salvation.
Jesus said, "For judgment I have come into this world, so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind."
Interesting.
Yeah. Some Pharisees who were with him heard him say this and asked, "What? Are we blind too?" Jesus said, "If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains."
And then we have the parable. So we'll stop right there. But you have to know that passage in what's going on, because this parable speaks to that. And we're gonna look at the parable and be done with it, I think, next week.